MeAdi ቤተሰብ ኩላትና ገቢብና ኣብታ ዓባይ መሶብ
Hello everyone again. My name is Icalo. So I'm going to ask everyone to introduce yourselves, like say your names and pronouns if you wish to share it, and your passion.
Hello, salam. My name is Rahwa Gavramikhail, and my gender pronouns are she, her. And my passion is always the healthcare ever since I could remember working. Mainly in the global health in the long term. I do want to go back to Eritrea and do a women health center, like this, aiming and focusing on young women who are young mothers without them being ready to be mothers, or even sending supplies if I can't do that, like having an organization here that supports women there.
Yeah, my name is Jonas Fikak. My pronouns are he, his, him. My passion really is social justice. My work is in the nonprofits and the schools, yet my work is really ultimately about seeing a more just society across the world, not just here in the United States. And so any movement that is for the marginalized community, that is for the oppressed community, is also my movement. So I consider that to be my passion.
Thank you, brother. Yeah, so Saman Andu. My pronouns are also he, him. Let's see, I was born and raised in the Middle East, been in America for almost 20 years now, since 2001. And yeah, I think I echo what Brother Jonas said. My passion is also in serving the community and humanity overall, and standing for justice for everyone across this world, basically. And that's something I've dedicated my life to and will continue to do so. So, yeah.
We've seen, especially Rahwa and Simone the other day, organizing a rally, Habesha rally for justice for Black people.
So we say defund the police and instead invest in community care. We want to see healthcare funded. We want to see safety funded. We want to see education funded.
Well, you no longer have the luxury of being a bystander, for that automatically places you in the rank of the oppressed. Okay? This is the time we live in today. If we're willing to do the work or not. So all of us have work. So let's get to it. Love, peace to you all.
It was a beautiful rally. So given the unrest or the protest against the murder of Black folks, how have you been impacted personally, and what has been your reflection? And I'm going to start with Simone, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I mean, I've been impacted in so many ways, to be honest. I guess if you look at just the professional side of what I do, I work with homeless youth, and there have been a few of my youth who've been murdered on the streets of Seattle because of the police. And working with homeless youth and just working with the youth in our community, even in the early 2000s, I remember that there was a police sergeant in West Seattle who came and he wanted to recruit me to go and just speak to youth in the jails, because at the time, this was 2005, he was saying that East Africans are dominated. Like when you look at youth prisons and detention centers, our youth are just off the chain. And so, you know, my brother being an African American and me an African, or my brother being, or like I'm being an Eritrean and somebody else is being an Ethiopian, or those divisions as well has made us weaker as as Africans. And it's time for us to elevate our thinking and to look past those divisions that exist within our community in order for us to really reach our potential and overcome this oppressive force, you know, not just the police, but just the systems that exist overall that has oppressed us for so long, right?
This specific protest has been, I feel like it was like a call for us before I see anything happen to my brothers and sisters. Like, that's where I told my parents, I'm like, they knew I was gonna go. They didn't even question it. Like if there's a protest for the people, who was gonna be there. So it's been like a more of a really like, I felt like it was getting closer and closer to home because I've been hearing about so many different stories. Like now there's a young Habesha guy who was found hung. They were claiming it as a suicide. Like, come on, what coincidence is this? You're finding a lot of black folks being hung in trees. You cannot just label it as suicide if it's, it's trending right now. And so, it's been, I know as African, as Eritrean or Habesha, like a lot of people may seem just like it's not our war, but it is. That's why I organized the protest that we had. Like at the end of the day, if your skin is black, if you're any shade of brown, any shade of black, you are period black to the police. So don't be ignorant. Like we all come from Africa. Like the whole world came from Africa at some point, But you cannot be divided within your community. Like there's division of our culture, but we need to acknowledge that's beautiful. That shouldn't be an ugly division among us. That's when I was like, bring the black people, bring the African people, or people that claim both, come together. This fight is your fight as much as it is for the African American, because a lot of Habesha felt like they weren't impacted by it. Like I told Kiniga, like I don't know if you guys understand Kiniga, but they're like, stay home. Like no, it's not. It impacts me. I told my mom, like, are you gonna wait till they come knocking at our door and harass you or harass my little brother or older brother? Like, why are we waiting? Like there's like a old quote, I don't know how it went. It's like pretty much like they came for the Jew, they came for the African, they came for the Japanese, and then now they came for me. So don't wait for them to come in your door to harass you for you to feel like you have to speak up. If they're already taken over like a group of black young men with this whole police brutality, why not like speak up? Even if I was white, I think we should all speak up because we're all gonna be eventually a victim of the police. So that's what I was telling my mom. Thanks to my older brother who's been educating my parent, like the history of African American. They were enslaved from Africa. They came here, So it all ties down to all of us, So the Habesha community, I wish we get together more and actually, because that protest was mainly to just let them know you should march, you should protest, you should do all these, but we need to have this conversation. I love the fact Jonas invited me to this. Thank you. And your colleague, both of you. This is amazing. We should meet at a park, do social distancing, and have these conversations.
That is exactly what our intention is, to create more spaces like this and to both spread the knowledge and create dialogues, because that's where change starts, right?
Exactly.
We don't know how this is exactly going to manifest in the world, and we can do our part to create these spaces for each other. And so actually, this is a perfect segue. We're gonna ask questions about your experience with like anti-blackness. And I think there's like we have a certain definition, and I think maybe naming it, at least from me, I'm gonna name my own, is like, when we say anti-blackness, we're talking about like negative sentiments directed at black people, right? And often it could be at black Americans, but also indirectly, it's us as well in some ways. For example, in the Habesha community, there's like colorism involved, right? About who's lighter, who's black, who deserves what based on what they look like. That's an example of what we say. When I think about anti-blackness, that's what we're referring to. And that's a limited definition. And so feel free to expand on what you think that is and isn't. So my question for you all is, do you think that there is some kind of anti-blackness in the Habesha community? And what are some of the ways you've seen it manifest in the community? So I'll repeat the question again. Do you think that there is some kind of anti-blackness in the Habesha community? And what are some of the ways you've seen it manifest? And we can start.
Of course.
Rahawa, back to you. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay. Of course, there's anti-blackness. Anti-blackness, I feel like is rooted in every single person's home, like, which is sad. Like that's the white folks teaching. That was it was brought by them. It was not brought by my mom and dad. It was not brought by your parents. So I believe like there's anti-blackness pretty much wherever you go, whether you know or not. Sometimes you're not even aware of yourself. But some of the anti-blackness I've seen myself was like, typical like Habesha parents saying like, why are you gonna marry this Salim? Even Kunama, come on, in our own tribe. We look down on Kunama because they're darker than I am. They're different shade. They're like, if I stay in the sun, I'll be just as dark as them eventually. So it's really ugly. It's really sad to witness, especially within our culture, not even just within the African American, but within the Habesha. We look at different shade, light skin, brown skin, all that stuff. Like we shouldn't. Dark skin people are beautiful. Right? Within our family, we definitely have. I'm not allowed to marry a black man. Like my mom would be shameful. Like what? That's not okay. Like it's real. Maybe for her reasons could be different, not just about his skin color, but the media has taught her too, because African American are gangbangers. They steal, they do this. That's the media. That's what it showed her. And her, I could say my mom and dad they lack knowledge and they lack education. The language barrier it could impact the way how ignorant they are. But us youth, we should not have that excuse. We could read and write. We have social media. We could use our resources to stop that anti-blackness. And if my brother's sitting down with my mom and dad trying to teach them this whole anti-blackness and making them more woke on this and the thing that's happening to us right now, I'm like, we could all do that. Like, come on, take 2 minutes of your day, go educate yourself. I don't see any excuses for the youth to be having anti-blackness or not speaking up about any anti-blackness you witness. I would not let it slide if I hear any anti-blackness around me. That's not okay. That's a community I built for myself, and we could all do that with our own small community. It doesn't have to be Habesha. It could be your own community, your neighborhood. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it starts within you. You know.
Absolutely. So thank you for sharing that, Rahul. And I'm gonna pass it to someone to see what his thoughts are on that as well.
Because I think anybody who's been colonized is conditioned, and that's like the baseline of I think how I'll approach this question. With that being said, I think if we go back to before the Europeans came to Africa, I think even the concept of black didn't exist. You know, from my studies and looking at just the historical narrative, the concept of just even black didn't exist. And I think one important aspect that we don't talk about is the lack of education and understanding how we were colonized and how we were conditioned. And that's where everything else comes from, right? I know a lot of conversations that I've been having over the last 3 weeks is about how we glorify the Italians' time in Eritrea. You know, we glorify and we don't talk about everything they have done, you know. And so we really don't know our history. We don't know Africa, even as Habesha people, as Eritreans, as Ethiopians, as I'll talk about East Africans in general, you know, or Africans in general. We don't know much about the history of Africa before colonization, how we viewed ourselves, what was, you know, the political system that existed, you know, socially. And I know there is probably a lot of narrative out there, but I'm sure there's something. And so I think when we start digging into that, our whole concept of who we are as humans will change, you know. And the same thing goes to our African American brothers in the Americas and any indigenous population that has been colonized in the world. Once we begin to look at the historical narrative of how before the white man or the colonizers came to our shore, how did we live? How did we view ourselves? And then after, and how did they use, you know, how they use certain systems to divide us in order to rule us. And once we look at that and track it until today, we will understand everything, in my opinion, you know. So they had to have a part of, you know, the population get on their side, and how they did that is by separating, you know, the lighter skin from the darker skin. And that's something that existed in Africa, here in the Americas, the house Negro versus the field Negro. And so all of those things exist. And I don't want to, I guess, I'm sure you guys know all of this stuff, you know. So those things are inherited generation to generation within our communities. And I think that's to speak up to what Rahul was talking about. That exists. And I think all of us, you know, like my fiance is lighter skin. And when she comes to the older ladies at the Tatna, you know, they look at her and like to them like she's extremely beautiful because she's lighter skin, right? I think the other aspect is like even within my family and a lot of our elders, and you know, I don't think they mean like bad when they say, but they're like, we came to America, you know, within 15 years, 20 years, we were able to buy a house and do well for ourselves. While our African American brothers and sisters are still, you know, like they haven't moved far in their personal development in life. But like these are conversations I bring to my father, to a lot of people, you know, and I try to educate them about the whole concept of generational trauma and the effect of it. And I, not only do I bring the African American people of the Americas, but I talk about our Native brothers and sisters. And even within our families and our culture, we don't talk about the trauma of the Cold War.
And I'm wondering, I think I would love to hear more about like experiences that you had directly, like moments where you are like, okay, that is definitely like an anti-blackness like sentiment that person holds. Like have you had moments of anti-blackness that you've experienced, like from other folks within our community? And how did you react then? And then how would you have liked to have reacted looking back?
I mean, yeah, I think one example I provided was just many conversations I have with my close family members just about the whole concept of African versus African American. They make certain judgments about, like I said, like just. So I guess I'll tell you a story. There was like a close family member of mine worked in construction, and he would talk about how he showed up in a short time, and how he ended up doing really well in comparison to, he had 3 African American counterparts. Who would then, because they were taking certain classes to get certifications, and all the African Americans who were with him dropped out, and he came like in his almost 50s, and he stayed, and so in that conversation he kept saying that like like they're not, like they don't do well, and like psychologically they're not strong enough, and he attributed it to the whole race. And I had to stop him, and I was like, do you understand why that's coming from? Like the whole concept of self, and the whole concept of like, I was like, where you're from. You grew up in a place where, like no, even like with the war and everything, but you still have so much going on for you. And that's the reason like you can, it's like this, that psychological oppression, and for them, I was trying to explain the whole, they didn't understand, like I said, like the concept of generational trauma and what these people have to go through, and so that's one aspect, I guess, to answer your question. But even me personally, I'm not going to go too far. There are many times where, like, in my class, they were showing us that, forget like Africans and African Americans and all. I was like, even between Africans and Africans, like everything we see in the media, they brought basically in a classroom, they show us an experiment they did where they had different pictures of people. So like an Afghani man, somebody with a turban, a woman with a hijab, a black man wearing like baseball jerseys, etc., decked out in chains, and like they have people hooked up to machines, and they get to see their heart rate. And whenever like a picture of a white man would come, it was normal. Whenever a picture of like a Muslim man with like a turban or with like a woman with a hijab goes up, a black man sees a black man, their heart rate and like it goes up, right? So that tells you that we are even conditioned. And I try to check myself too. Like I always talked about, like don't go too far, even between the 4 of us. Like subconsciously, there are so many things that are ingrained in who we are in our psyche that even when we drive, when we see somebody, like sometimes you take a longer route, not to cross certain people, And so I do that personally, to be honest, and that's something I'm working on until now. I'm not even going to go too far. I'll just talk about me as a person. I do that personally and not even realize it, And so I think we all can do better in that sense. I don't know if that answers your question, but like I definitely have a lot of biases, and even me, and I still work on it, and I will continue to work on it.
Yeah, it definitely does. And thank you for being vulnerable and saying that, because I think that's important. We're not having this conversation because we're woke, like people like to say. I don't really like the term that much. I think that it makes it look like it's a destination instead of a process. And so we're all like constantly learning. And so I really appreciate you being vulnerable. I am curious though, I think you shared the experience you had with the people you had conversations about. And I'm curious, like part of what we want to do is like learn from the past, right? Like looking back at that conversation, because we all have those struggles. I've had those struggles trying to explain and still coming out like not really like having people get what I'm saying, right? And so like, how do we, looking back now, like, are there things that you're like, oh, you know what, I would have approached that a little bit differently, maybe so they can hear me out?
This is my thingy. At least for me, when most of these conversations are, I think, with our elders, like the kind of conversation I just shared. And for a lot of that too, you have to understand that like they have their own experiences, and you have to be patient, engage with them with logic, and bring in examples. If you get emotional about it, then they're not gonna listen to you, and that's my experience. And so every time, and it's not a one-time conversation too. Like with my father, with my mom, with a lot of people, like it's a continuous thing to where, and I think we've come a long way.
It just takes to teach your parent, and your parent will teach your uncles. That's what I told my brother.
Exactly.
I'm like, they're gonna have this conversation, so if we're educating at least one of them, the word of mouth is more powerful. Are you only having anti-blackness conversation racism, Black Lives Matter only with me, or are you having it with your community too? So that's the same thing that goes for us Habesha people. Are we having these conversations with our parents? Like that's where it starts. You know, are we having this conversation? I have nieces, so my parents are their grandparents. Their grandparents' thoughts and opinion means a big deal to them. You know, if your grandma hates a dark skinned person, you think that dark skinned niece of mine is gonna feel loved and like cherished by her grandma? No. So it's that conversation we have with my mom and dad. You know, thank God they have been pretty open minded. They're like learning. They're actually more like they feel more and they feel more empowered than these people that have 2 master's degree. Like education don't mean shit if you're not with it in your head. If you don't have like basic human respect, that school can't teach you that. That comes within your family and your community. It's how you treat your family and how you're going to treat people outside your family. So I say hold yourself accountable to, like I'm saying, educate your family, educate your parents.
I would say this though, look, at the end of the day though, like even the anti-blackness sentiment is learned, right?
Yeah.
Racism is learned.
Definitely, like this complicated thing that we're bringing in the impact of colonization, the impact of systemic racism, the impact of racism here, even racism against Habesha people here as immigrants. There's a lot of pieces to this. So
Exactly.
the question for you is like, how does this complicate the work for you? Like, how does this complicate you being a Habesha person and also a Black person here in the United States? Like, how does that complicate anti-Blackness for you? Like, specifically, like in your personal experiences?
It's hard. It's like the Black people think I don't like them. When I was hosting that for the Habesha community, the rally, the march, they're like, you know, why do you guys hate us? I'm like, oh my gosh, you broke my heart. I'm like, I don't hate you. I don't know who made you to feel like that. You're I see you just like my brother and sister. You're just not the same culture that I am. Obviously, that difference is there. We know that, but for them to think that they categorize me with the rest of the Habesha community, because that is my community. But I hate that they feel like I don't love or adore them.
Just personally, I think this as a man of color in the United States, I've definitely seen it in so many ways. You know, migrating here, people making fun of obviously my accent, calling me certain names. In the workplace too, I think just I am a program manager now. Currently, even right now, having conversations to be a program director, you know, at a nonprofit. But even then, like, it took forever for me to get to this point when I was doing the work of a director for so long, if that makes sense, you know? And I think a lot of that is just to be in certain rooms and advocate, and for not just me, for a lot of our people, to be honest. But it's exhausting. Those are little things that we always see. And the division, of course, between the African and African-American exists in our communities. And so we have to dismantle them. That's why we had that march, to be honest. And that's why, you know, I think it's important for us to continue this conversation.
Absolutely. Simone, thank you for saying that. I think it's because there are some similarities, also differences within like Blackness, Black in America, Black across the world. Often I think we don't do a good job of like saying that we have differences in our experiences and our, maybe even like we share identities, we also don't share certain identities, right?
Sure.
And that means that we will have like a divergent experience at times, right? Like we experience being an immigrant as well, like you just mentioned about like people making fun of your accent, or people making fun of like your traditions, or the different things that you bring to someone else. Right. And so I think like that's what like often complicates it for me as well, where I try to engage in that conversation about like being Black, but also sometimes getting a pushback of like, you're not Black or not Black enough, or you don't know what it feels like. So I think being able to hold like, oh yeah, I don't know what it feels like to be a descendant of enslaved people.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right. And I think we need to own that. And we can own experiencing racism in the United States of America.
But you know, Brother Yaras, and that's why I say like we often compare our oppression. So like it's like an oppression marathon. Who's more oppressed? And that's what I say. Like our brothers and sisters stolen from Africa faced slavery, you know, and it was horrific. And then those who stayed in the motherland also, we had genocides in concentration camps also in Africa that a lot of people don't talk about. Like millions of people annihilated.
To that, how do you think the anti-blackness bias or prejudice in the Habesha community perpetuates the systemic racism in general. How do you connect this? How does it contribute to the racism in general?
I mean, I think that goes back to the first conversation I had earlier, you know, by having the division, you know, between people, like, you know, by saying, okay, the lighter person can like in Eritrea, I believe like X amount of people back in the day, even with the Italians, were allowed within the city as opposed to others. I don't know a lot of the history in depth, but I talked to a lot of my uncles, and I try to do a lot of, you know, like self-education on how it was over there too. And so by having that, like even in Americas, you know, lighter skinned people had X amount of jobs, or like they are looked at in a certain way. It continues to have the divide within our people, right? And so I guess systematic racism, I think there are certain systems that exist in place that that people benefit from, and there are certain systems that are unseen. And in the sense of, I guess, in the sense of, yeah, like those kind of divisions, and how the oppressors benefit from it is by continuing to divide our people, and that anything that divides us, I guess, to simplify everything, benefits those who wants to continue oppressing us, you know, as a people in America and in Africa, and exists until today. Look at our people and look how divided we are.
I think, let me just add something real quick. I think a very clear example of what you're saying, Simone, is beauty standards. You know, beauty standards are very much tagged against like whiteness, right? So often beauty standards, beauty is commodified.
Exactly.
Commodified and has value, and it means that people who are darker skinned, or mostly people of color, are often priced at a much lower price than they would be in a capitalist society. And so
and you know, and you can, like I said, like that's what I'm saying. Like when you talk about the system, that is like the blueprint of how you oppress people, and then you can really like take like the example of beauty and religion, for example. Even right now, there's a whole conversation about like, look at our churches and Jesus, white Jesus. Now, those whole concept, even though Jesus, we believe in Jesus and all, but was he a white man? And like how we view, you know, the white man in so many things, just whiteness, in so many things, in language, in our house of worship, in our standard of beauty, and everything, basically, right? And so that's what I was saying, like, you have to understand the system in order for you to overcome it. And
Absolutely.
Yes, I'm listening. Continue this conversation. It's so powerful to do. It's so powerful to do this because I think the power of conversations is, especially for the next generation, when they get to listen to us talking this way, you don't know the ripple effects of what you're doing right now until later on. And so thank you guys so much for doing this, and let me know how I can help in continuing to do this, because change begins with conversations. And when we all talk about this and continue to align our action with our thoughts and words, then change happens. And so it's extremely powerful.
Thank you, Simone. We appreciate you. We'll definitely keep you in the loops about this, and we appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate you guys. Have a great day.
Take care.
MeAdi ቤተሰብ ኩላትና ገቢብና ኣብታ ዓባይ መሶብ የዳውና ገቲርና እጅ ደግ ስብሰብ በትሕሳስ ንደት የዳውና ክንሕፀብ እዚ ብለኒ ኩልና ክንከብ ጭሻይ ፍርያትና